My last thought before dying for what felt like the 8th time on Thanh Hoa Bridge was that I had a guy pinned inside a shack. I lined up at the doorframe, breathed out, and waited for him to emerge from cover. Then his squad mate, who I didn't even imagine would be waiting nearby, sniped me from 100 meters behind me. As soon as I heard the distant crack of the shot, I found myself back on the redeploy screen. In fact, the entire 2-hour preview of Hell Let Loose Vietnam unfolded much the same way. Around the 90-minute mark, I began to truly respect what Expression Games had built. A truly hardcore 50 vs 50 Vietnam-era Milsim that pulls no punches, rewarding sharp tactical interplay as quickly as it punishes its absence. Welcome to Hell Let Loose Vietnam. The Western Front is gone and the North Vietnamese army is in. Almost everything else about the classic Hell Let Loose formula is intact, including the famously steep learning curve and the resource-driven meta, where commanders sit on a tactical map juggling manpower, munitions, and fuel reserves, the same way that an RTS general would. I played the preview event on Thanh Hoa Bridge, a version of the historical Dragon's Jaw from Operation Rolling Thunder, which feels like a giant wet jungle stitched together with rice paddies, river crossings, and a few villages where most of the dying happens. Speaking of, there is a lot of dying in Hell Let Loose Vietnam, and its whole personality flows from that. For full transparency, I played with a PC that had a 4070 Ti, a Ryzen 3900X CPU, and 32GB of RAM. All of this on a 3440 by 1440p monitor on high settings, with DLSS set to quality, frame generation set to medium, and reflex switched on. The build itself was clearly preview grade. Foliage popped in close to the camera during firefights, frame pacing stuttered when effects stacked, and one time I got stuck in a body of water for a flat 20 seconds, unable to mantle out, before it inexplicably let me. I guess the animation eventually triggered on its own. But anyway, none of that worries me by itself at this stage. What does worry me though is that I explored every menu I could find and found no accessibility tab in the settings. Listen, for a Milsim with this kind of learning curve and such sensory minimalism, that omission could alienate a significant portion of its launch player base. These controls don't feel like Battlefield or Call of Duty, and you'll realize it in 30 seconds. It's WASD-based, but it takes longer to do, and there are fewer ways to get sensory input. Take the loadout, for example. My American rifleman started each life with an M16, some bandages, and a combat knife. No pistol, which surprised me for a Milsim, so committed to authenticity. But anyway, the cool thing, if ramming steel into a stranger's throat can be called cool, is that tapping caps lock equips a bayonet and pressing B sinks it home. In action, it's clunky, much like Hell Let Loose has always been. Reloads have weight, and aiming down sights has a slight lag compared to the twitchier shooters that most players are accustomed to. You also can't sprint mantle shoot the way that you can in modern Battlefield. If you're used to having your character perform multiple actions simultaneously, the first hour will probably feel frustrating. The roll kits make that friction systemic and enforce team play. As a rifleman, I could drop a small ammo box for teammates to resupply ammunition, which came in handy since you get so little ammo to start. At one point, I tried joining a new squad and found its 3 rifleman slots filled up, so I played medic instead. That kit didn't differ a ton, instead including morphine syrettes that automatically marked any critically wounded ally within 100 meters with a syringe icon on my screen. Then of course, in classic medic fashion, I could go run to them and revive them if I needed to. Medics could also supposedly drag downed teammates faster than anyone else and fire a sidearm one-handed during the drag, but I didn't get to see that in action during the preview session. The core class distinction comes down to a slight difference in loadout that makes a rather large difference on the field. The functions modern shooters cram into one loadout are split across 5 different roles here, and the result is that even basic Battlefield outcomes, like keeping a guy alive, getting a guy resupplied, or building a piece of critical infrastructure for the whole squad to use, require coordinating with someone who picked the right specialty before the round even started. Think old school Battlefield, like for example Battlefield Vietnam, but with even more granularity between classes. When the coordination clicks, it feels way more immersive than other games in the genre, but when it didn't, I just found myself running through a swamp for 5 minutes and then dying again. Thanh Hoa is one of these 6 maps shipping at launch. The others are inspired by real engagements like Operation Starlight at Von Tuong, the Tet Offensive at Hue, the Battle of Dak To, the Cam Ranh logistics port, and Quang Nai, where Viet Cong activity was sustained throughout the war. I only got the opportunity to test out Thanh Hoa, and even after 2 hours, I couldn't tell you where half the sightlines opened up. You don't get a hit indicator when you land a shot on an opponent, you barely get directional damage arrows before collapsing, and once you're downed, it's unlikely anyone will be close enough to help you. The settings menu does include toggles for show killer's name and show cause of death, but the defaults skew toward find out the hard way. And it seems that even with the helpers turned on, Hell Let Loose Vietnam still refuses to point an arrow at the muzzle flash you missed. You get sound, you get whatever you can see through the canopy, and you better hope that's enough. That sensory floor is where Hell Let Loose Vietnam stops feeling like a flat-screen shooter and starts feeling like something it isn't designed to be. It's the first shooter in a while that's made me think, unironically, that it would probably be better in VR. Okay, hear me out. There's a head on a swivel kind of situational awareness that you build in something like Onward VR, and that translates directly into a certain sort of tactical instinct, which Hell Let Loose Vietnam asks for while only handing you a mouse and a keyboard to execute with. When you redeploy, you spawn at a garrison behind friendly lines. Garrisons are team-wide deployables, capped at 8 per side, placed by a squad leader or commander using supplies dropped by a specialist. Alternatively, you spawn at an outpost, a unit-only version your squad leader plants near the objective. As far as I know, you cannot spawn directly onto your squad mates on a battlefield. You also can't spawn at a captured point unless your team has fortified it first. So every time that you want to spawn, like after you've died, you'll typically just look at the tactical map and pick one of two options. For the most part, I couldn't find any outposts to spawn at, so I spawned inside the garrison. From there, I was faced with two more options. Wait for the dev-piloted transport helicopter to take me back to the front lines, or start walking. During my session, riding the chopper back to the hot zone was rarely an option. Because the developers had locked players out of all vehicle controls for the preview, we either waited for a developer to respawn back to base and pick us up, or ran back in on foot. I usually just gave up and started running. From the rear garrison to the front lines was a roughly 5-minute jungle sprint through the swamp, a jaunt that lasted long enough to forget my frustration before catching a bullet from an unseen enemy. And then I respawned after a 30-second wait, give or take, and I started the 5-minute walk back. This is the design choice that will define who loves Hell Let Loose Vietnam and who quietly disengages after a couple of matches. For hardcore players, the friction is the point. The Conquest mode that I played even has a finite morale ticker that depletes with every team redeployment, meaning a careful squad leader who plants a smart outpost 100 meters from the objective contributes more to the team than 3 players topping the kill chart. For everyone else, that math will feel like punishment. What kept me engaged during the long walks was the voice chat. Hell Let Loose has always lived and died on squad communication, and the preview reminded me why. Toward the end of the second skirmish, I switched to the NVA side just to see what the other half of the asymmetry looked like, and I ended up as the observer on a mortar team with no other members. Observers are the mortar unit's forward eyes, equipped with binoculars to spot enemies and to mark them on the tactical map for a gunner and a support who would, in theory, load and fire high explosive shells. Mine, on the other hand, didn't exist. Instead, I sat at range, scanning the jungle with my binoculars anyway, because spotting from 200 meters out turned out to be the most relaxing thing I did all session. Then I switched to the equally empty recon team and tried to plant an outpost behind the line, and my former teammates on the American side shot me down for it a few times. Meanwhile, the NVA commander, played by one of the developers in the match, was audibly begging us via comms to set up tunnels at a recently captured point. Watching a dev get that invested in his own work is genuine in a way that cannot be manufactured, and it seems that Hell Let Loose Vietnam is built to produce exactly that kind of emergent communication, which is one of the best arguments for this style of Milsim to still exist in 2026. The asymmetry is where Expression Games introduces something genuinely new to the franchise. The US faction seemingly exclusively uses helicopters, while the NVA faction seemingly exclusively uses tunnel networks. Tunnels can be linked into a connected web on the tactical map, and NVA garrisons double as tunnel entrances when integrated into that network, allowing players to fast travel between connected nodes. Helicopters spawn from fixed helipads, and transport variants can act as mobile spawn points when landed. The NVA machine gunner can deploy a static anti-aircraft emplacement to counter air threats. The US side counters the underground game with napalm strikes. This asymmetry runs deeper than the slightly better tank calculation that most military shooters settle for, and both factions in Hell Let Loose Vietnam have to fight with different verbs to win. I can't yet say how most of that plays in practice. As I was mostly on the American side, the vehicle lockout meant I never piloted a chopper or drove a tank. I mean, sure, yeah, I saw armor rolling through jungle sightlines, and I did hear planes overhead. And to be fair, the mechanical design of this asymmetry is the most interesting aspect of the build, but its practical application is something I'll have to revisit. To its benefit, there's also the 17-strong class roster, spread across infantry, armor, helicopter, recon, and mortar units. My squad comprised riflemen and infrequently myself as the medic. Aside from a few stray devs I saw go off on their own, we never really utilized the 2-person recon unit whose spotter is the only class that can place a spawn outpost inside locked enemy territory, or the 2-person helicopter unit, which splits into a pilot and logistics officer. Tank crews were also entirely off limits. When you see 17 distinct classes on the storefront, the first question is whether the developer can balance that spread across a 50 versus 50 lobby. I genuinely don't know the answer yet. Preview just didn't give me enough to tell. I was left with a handful of open questions I'm taking back to the full release. Will all 17 classes feel mechanically distinct in practice, or will the meta collapse into the same 3 or 4 picks every long match? Does Hell Let Loose's hyper-realism intertwined with Conquest Mode's morale economy create the careful, life-preserving play that it seems to want, or just make losing teams feel doubly punished? If you're craving a slow, communications-heavy Milsim that respects your time enough to punish you for misusing it, and you don't mind working around some roughness and a learning curve that hasn't softened much, Hell Let Loose Vietnam still looks very much itself. That's a good thing if you already loved this series, and a warning if you didn't. For more previews of the biggest upcoming games, check out our recent looks at Valor Mortis and Halloween, and for everything else in gaming, stick with IGN.